to the current challenges in the world. And he brought his cameraman Mike Kanz from the US. And we also had Isabel Riofrio, who also works for Mongabay, but Latin America, and she comes from Ecuador. So these were our journalists, and you can learn more about them in the video that we sent yesterday.
Okay, thank you, Christina. So we're now going to go into discussion groups. I think Matthias is our Chief of Technology here. We'll divide into two groups, I think, Matthias. Will give us a good number in each. So what we found very successful in the Lima weekend was sitting down with people and letting them talk about their best story. That's what we called the session, your best story, the work they were most proud of in their career. And we asked them what part of that story really excited them, what made it their best story. Was it the initial research? So all the desk work beforehand, when you're framing the story in your head and thinking this would be really good to get out there to the public? Was it perhaps the interview? You found a really good interviewee and they gave you all the information you needed. They were really clear in their explanation of the complex situation you might be trying to cover. Or was it the production? Was it getting the interview back to base and editing it and getting it into a nice form of words or into a video or audio file that would really bring the story alive? Or for that matter, was it the reaction when you published it? Did the world go mad and think, wow, fantastic? So what part of it really excited you? And then the other question, what have you learned that you would pass on to others from that best story? Now, I think we were offering you the chance to choose Spanish or English, but I think we only had one nomination, and that's for English. So I think we'll do both groups in English, unless people are wanting to do otherwise. We'll run this for 15 minutes, which will be until 3:05, and then we'll, 3:05 my time, I should say, 5 minutes past the hour, and then we'll ask you to write your feedback as a Twitter feed. So 280 characters maximum in the chat box, which we can all see on the side of our screen if we highlight the speech bubble that's at the bottom of the screen. And then when we return, Christina will take us through those Journalist Training Initiative stories in a bit more detail so we can see what they came up with. So Matthias, if you're ready to divide us into two groups, this will all happen on screen. You don't need to do anything yourselves. You'll find yourselves in a group and then can introduce yourselves to each other and then get started on the discussion. And there'll be some members of our staff in there as well to help guide you. So Matthias, press the button and divide us.
Yeah, Simon, I need you to give me the right to host.
Okay, so how do I do that?
Yeah, right click on my name and make host.
Oh, right, okay. I've just got to find your name in the participants. And more, make host. Here we are. I'm changing the host to you. There you go.
Just a moment now. Yeah, for some reason, Simon, I don't get the breakout room, the breakout groups option.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We've had some trouble with Zoom today. First of all, it sent a number to everybody, and now we can't do that. Shall I try and make you the host again? But it. No, it doesn't offer me anything there.
Yeah.
Well, let's all have one big discussion group then. I think.
Yeah, we can have one big discussion group. That's all right.
Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. Then all of our pictures will appear on the screen, and we can all have a big discussion around the best story. So if I can just get my mouse to appear. There we are. Stop sharing the screen. And now if you want to see everybody, then click up at the top onto gallery view. If it says speaker view at the moment, you've already got gallery view, and that will allow you to see everybody all on the page there. So let's start introducing ourselves. I've said who I am. Laura, can I ask you to introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you're from?
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Wise. I am currently based in Dallas, Texas. I just recently moved here. I spent 6 years in New York, but just recently relocated. I'm happy to be here. I am a freelance writer, I write for Triple Pundit and Corporate Responsibility Magazine, which is based here in the US, and we talk a lot about sustainability.
She froze, right? Yeah, she froze. This is what.
Simon, you're muted. I think we can't hear you.
Okay, Laura, you just froze there, so carry on with the end of your last sentence.
Okay. I just said that the publication that I work with, we focus on sustainability and specifically how the business community plays a part in helping us to create a sustainable future.
Great. Okay, thank you. Rudy, do you want to tell us who you are and where you're from? You're muted still. That's it?
I'm here. Okay. Is it working? Yeah.
Yep, it's fine.
I'm based in Venice, in Italy. I'm a freelance, I'm focused on climate change and the renewable transition and sustainability issues, mostly here in Europe. But I did some stuff in Southeast Asia and and work in some good stories in Africa, but I never been on the field in Africa. I'm freelance. I work with several Italian newspaper, and magazine, and I'm trying to start to collaborate with, for example, El País and Deutsche Welle. But I told you in the next section because this is part of my biggest story, you know.
Okay, great. Manuel, tell us about yourself. We can see you, but we can't hear you, Manuel. Okay, let's try Lisa. Lisa Herman, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay. Well, I'm a Danish freelance journalist based in South America. I live in Ecuador. I've been in South America for the last 9 years. I do stories from Ecuador, also Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, sometimes Central America like Nicaragua, Costa Rica. I've also recently been to Cuba. I publish in Danish and Norwegian media, also work for Deutsche Welle, and recently I also started to publish in Spanish in media in Ecuador. I work kind of with a broad range of subjects, environmental issues, climate change, but also social issues, human rights, indigenous issues. And for instance, I do a lot of stories related to migration from Venezuela or the peace process in Colombia.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you. Manuel, are you there, or shall we carry on without you? No, I think he's probably been called away. Well, Rudy, you volunteered that you had a story you were particularly proud of. Why don't we start with you, seeing as you sort of voted for going first, it sounded like.
Yeah. It's the best way to start, you know, to break the ice. Right. I will publish, I think on Sunday, this first part of this story. We was a team, an international team. We are based in 3 different countries. I was based in Italy for Europe. My colleague was is in South Africa, and the other one in China, and try to work on wildlife trafficking online, especially in life, to try to understand the illegal financial flow and how internet and web helps people to buy and sell protected and endangered species. I focus myself on reptile in Europe because it's one of the big market, especially in Italy, Spain, and Germany, and is a kind of hub because all the species came from species came from Africa, goes through Europe, and then go to China mostly. So we work undercover. I work undercover, and this is the part of the research, and maybe was the most exciting part as journalist, because I had to think in another personality and try to understand what the seller want from me and how to fix and works with all this stuff. I was undercover in one of the biggest fair in Germany in June. Is a fair that journalist is not allowed to get in, and I tried to go inside. I did it. I talked with some guys, and I records some quotes of records, obviously, and I take some stolen picture, and I will publish it because I found some reptile that in CITES 1 is not allowed to sell to the people because it's strictly protected. And this is one part of my story. Then on Facebook, we found some smuggler from Africa, and with a fake number or anonymous number on WhatsApp, I did some kind of interview. I tried to understand how works the market, how can sell, where send the animal, and especially where the money comes and where will go. You know.
So what impresses me about what you're doing is, and we haven't used this word yet, but it's the systems view you're taking. You're looking at the whole system, you and your colleagues in the different countries. So some people would just look at the poaching, but you're looking at the market for it in the countries that receive the goods. You know, it's a very good encapsulation of the whole system.
Yeah, is a question or?
No, it's just a compliment.
Okay, sorry. We work in different way because we work together, but everyone moves alone in different commodities. Because, for example, my colleague Roxanne works on ivory in Africa, and I think that works on the field in Namibia with some ranger and some NGOs. And we have some problem with the Chinese colleague, because you know better than me that then it's really difficult to have a clear communication with China and send link and send documents because it's all filtered. So sometimes it was really hard to talk each other, you know. And this is one of the big part of problem with the international team when we together. If you didn't know what's happened to your colleague, it's different to go ahead and work. And this is kind of a good side of the cross-border journalism. But you know, I think that maybe I'm the older one here in this little group, and I'm working journalist from I think in 10 years, maybe more. And I try always to work in constructive journalism to find positive stories, because when you talk about climate change or environmental stuff, is really hard to show how big is the problem.
I can understand that. Okay, thank you. We'll come back in a minute and see what themes emerge when everybody's talked about their best stories. Laura, tell us about your best story if you've got one in mind.
Sure. I hope I don't cut out because I keep getting something that says my internet is unstable. So hopefully, let me know if you don't hear me.
Keep going.
One of my, I guess, biggest and favorite stories is not a very recent story, but I worked at one point for UMCOR, which is the United Methodist Committee on Relief. And we did a story talking about the 5-year anniversary.
You might be better if you switch
because
Laura, switch your video off. You might find it works better.
Okay.
The bottom left-hand corner of the screen, stop video. That's it.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. So as I was saying, I worked for UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, and I was tasked with kind of leading our coverage on the 5-year anniversary of the earthquake in Haiti. It was very important to our organization because our executive director actually passed away in the earthquake. He was on site visiting some of our partner organizations. And I think was actually going there, talking to different groups of people, talking with survivors, talking with people who had rebuilt their businesses from the ground up. And just really connecting with the people. It was very hands-on. I did a lot of the interviewing. I did a lot of the video work myself. And it was just a really great experience. And to be able to come back and pull that all together, it was really fun for me. And it did really well, again, for the organization because we had just such a close tie with some of the projects that we were actually funding and because of the death of our executive director there. So that was one of my favorite.
And did you talk in the story about what had happened to your executive director? Did that give it extra impact?
We did. So it was multi-layered. So it was, I would say we talked with some of our partners. We also talked specifically about the volunteer response and some of the kind of large volunteer networks we were able to pull together, did a story specifically about the executive director, and I was able to interview another guy who was actually in the earthquake with our executive director, but the executive director passed away and he didn't. So kind of getting that firsthand account of the story from him. We brought the executive director's family in and they kind of spoke a little bit about what he meant to their family and how passionate he was about the work. So it was multi-layered, and I also enjoyed that. It wasn't just one story. We did, interview format. We did long written format. We did some video content. So it was an interactive piece, and it was fun.
Great. Okay, sounds good. And Lisa, tell us about your favorite story.
Yes, one favorite story. Maybe I also thought of it because of the relation with the whole topic. Is I think it's some months ago. I went to the Amazon in Colombia to make an interview with one of the farmers, very actively cutting down the Amazon, to kind of get to know what's the reasons behind, why is he doing that, and what I was very happy about with the story is I really managed to get very close to the farmers and get to know them. And I made like a personal story. Peluche, he was called, this farmer. I hiked with him into this 100-hectare area he had just cut down, and he started showing me very proudly his progress for him and his family. And I just felt like crying myself because it was just, you could even, the smells, the sounds, everything, it was such a strong experience for me as a person to be in this place. And he was just telling, well, this is my future. And during the interviews and also during the writing, during the interview, I managed kind of to get this personal meeting. So actually, I felt like he changed a little bit his perspective while we talked, and he realized that, wow, maybe I'm not doing a good thing. But also kind of, I managed in the story to not show him as a bad guy, but as a person who just wants a future and he's looking for something good for his children. And then also managed in talking about constructive journalism a little bit, talking about what would he need to not keep on cutting down the Amazon, because all his neighbors were doing exactly the same and very, very fast. And this is like an extra ingredient. This is also in a very dangerous area in Colombia, so we had to pass through an area where the dissidents of the guerrilla are in power, and so it was also kind of not a place where everyone can go, and so I really felt like, even maybe myself, I changed a little bit about this. Maybe you have a tendency of thinking of the bad guys doing this deforestation, and I realized he was a really nice guy, Peluche. We got kind of friends, but also understand what's the dynamic behind, and then also, of course, it had a lot to do what's necessary for changing this. And also when I published this in Denmark and in Norway, I got a very, very good response, and people I felt like it was an eye-opener for a lot of people, and got a lot of reactions from readers. I don't always get that, and people will contact me on Facebook, and also my editors were very happy about it, because people were understanding the drivers behind deforestation. So that's a story I was very happy about.
So that sounds like you had both a good experience in the research and interview and production phase, but also a good response as well when you took it to the audience. Let's just spend a couple of minutes drawing together the themes. Sorry, Lisa, you were going to say?
What? Yeah. Can I just add a detail? I forgot to tell them. Yeah. Then also one thing that I felt, where I was like taking quite a risk in the storytelling thing. I really involved myself personally. So I told about this feeling I had about crying, and how horrible I felt being in this place, and how this personal approach, I don't know how you can use yourself as a person very strongly, and even also in how I talk with the Peluche, and that I felt that made it possible to kind of get to the readers in another way. Yeah. But it's a bit, sometimes a bit of a risk, but in that case it worked.
I think it's taking that broader view that we talked about earlier on, broadening the perspective of you as a person as well as the broadening perspective of the story. We've got a minute or so just to draw the threads together. Rudy, when you're writing and reporting on the people who are involved in the illegal trade that you're working on, is there ever a point where you explain, or where you feel that they don't have any alternative, rather like Lisa's deforesting farmers?
Right, this is a good point. I feel this sensation. Because I think that these people have another chance to earn money, and for one in particular, is all anonymous. Will be all anonymous. But for one in particular, I really understand that is his job, and he's doing really well in his part of the story. And I really, sometimes I feel sad to try to represent him like a smuggler, because I try to be constructive when I write my story, to write story in a positive way. In this case, it was really hard to do it, but maybe it's the same that happened with Lisa. Is right, Lisa? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that when you talk with these people, I worked a few years ago on palm oil too, because here in Europe was this huge problem with palm oil, and some journalists was in Southeast Asia. And when you talk with people, you firstly understand that what you read is totally different in their point of view. And I think that this is a part that we have to try to show to the reader, but it's really hard because the risk is that you don't keep the goal and the point in your story, and maybe it's too emotional in some part. It depends on what you want to write and what kind of paper or magazine. But in this case, I feel in some part I feel really sad. But I think is anonymous, so maybe I didn't give him some problems. I work with police and I give them all the documents that I have. But I know for sure that never happened.
Yeah.
Maybe they tried something in Egypt, but it's really hard to collaboration with the international police in enforcement. Maybe in Europe with Interpol we can do something, but in different continents it's really hard to work together.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to bring it to a close now and put the slides back up on the screen and hand over to Christina, who's going to take us through the stories that came up. And she's chosen her 5 favorite ones. So take us through them, Christina, and I'll do the slides for you.
Thank you, Simon. Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your best stories. I think they actually were perfect because this is exactly what we're trying to achieve. What we're trying to do is, first of all, with the initiative, I mean, when we brought these journalists to Lima and the Amazon, we wanted them to understand the complexity of the problem. So it's easy to report on how much deforestation is affecting this planet. It's easy to, launch a campaign to boycott palm oil, but we wanted them to understand what is everything on the table that has to do with these commodities and how complex the system is. Not only because there are so many stakeholders involved, but also because the consequences are very important. Like if we boycott palm oil, then millions of people in Indonesia are without jobs, blah, blah, blah. So this is very interesting that you actually got to do that in your best stories and that you like the experience, because this is what we're promoting. And I'm gonna, as Simon said, just show a few examples. I shared with you on the chat box 5 links. So I'm not gonna spoil the stories. I want you to read them and see what you think about them, considering you know what the conference was about, how it took place. And now I would love you to read these stories and see if that's what you would have done or like what you thought about them. But I'm just going to explain my favorite parts, like why do I think they're excellent. So first of all, we have Alejandra Agudo from El País, and this is very interesting because she was actually hurt during the conference. She broke her ankle and couldn't walk, and she wasn't able to go to the field visit that she wanted, and instead she got to go to the less interesting visit, which was more quiet and relaxed, and she got to go to Ecoparque, which is like a natural garden that is run by AMPA, which stands for Amazónicos por la Amazonía, which is an organization that helps people to make profit of the lands if they decide to conserve them, to keep this forest standings. So I was like, don't worry, you're gonna be fine, you're gonna like this. And she's like, okay. And in the end, she wrote this amazingly beautiful story because she got to understand from the owner of this space, of this Ecoparque, why for her it was so important to help these people keep their forest standings. And Liz, you were talking about this. She understood the perspective of the smallholders. Like deforestation mostly come from smallholders who cut their lands not because they want to be rich, but because they want to send their kids to school or because they want to be able to afford going to the doctor. And that's what she understood. That's what she saw there. And it was very interesting how she in her article explains the complexity of deforestation and why Peru is actually a leader in like anti-deforestation commitments, but what are the challenges and what are the solutions needed to address this issue, considering that the smallholders need to find a value in keeping their forest standings more than finding a value in cutting them and cultivating them. So it's a very interesting story, and it covers everything that we wanted them to understand while being in the Amazon for 5 days. Not only by going to the visit and talking with smallholders, but also by hearing the perspectives of the NGOs, the private sector, the public sector, all of us fighting to tackle this issue. So the second story, Simon, if you could change the slide.
Oh.
But yes, I'm not sure.
Yeah, there we go.
So this is the Palm Scribe. That's the new media outlet that one of our journalists from Indonesia created, and he went to the field visit where we visited Chazuta, which is a town that was completely changed by going from cultivating coke to cultivating cocoa. That happened because USAID put a lot of money for that to happen, but the interesting thing about this story, so this just the field visit was very interesting because you got to see how a little town came from like a complete dark era where like the streets were scary. There was a curfew because nobody could go out after nighttime. Everything that narco traffic brings to a society, to sustainable cocoa, where they managed to grow cocoa with no deforestation and get to sell this to the international community, which is like a very big recognition of like a locally cultivated cocoa, very high quality. But the interesting thing about this article is not only how he reports this change, but he explains how social development is not only about economic growth, because cocoa probably is more productive than cocoa and it gives more money for sure, but now the community is free. It's free to take their kids to school with no fear. It's free to walk the streets at night. It's another kind of development, and it's also very interesting. It's a less spoken about development. It's not so famous. It doesn't really reach the front pages of a newspaper, but it's also very important for this specific community. So to change from one commodity to another and to grow it sustainable is not only beneficial, it's environmentally friendly, but also it's good for the community. So the next story is from Edomo. He is our journalist from Nigeria, and we are so glad we brought him. And this is a very interesting article because it's different from any other article. What he did is not report on what he saw in the field visits, and probably he knew that his colleagues would do that. But he just walked around, talked to everybody at the conference, and had this amazing conversation with our UNDP green commodities representative in Costa Rica, Kifa. And he drew a case of how Africa can learn from Costa Rica in terms of going green in their energy, in terms of stopping deforestation. Costa Rica had in the 70s the highest rates of deforestation in the whole world. It had only 20% forest cover remain in the 70s, and now it's more than 50%, and it's aiming towards 60% in the next few years. So how can a country lead by example, and how can Africa learn from that? That is a very interesting. This conversation would not have happened unless we put an African journalist with a Costa Rica leader in the environment together in a conference, and they have a conversation over lunch. So for me, that's also very representative of how interesting it is to put so many people from different parts of the world, from different sectors together in a conference. So the next article is by Fabiano, and Fabiano is our Brazilian journalist, and it's also very funny how he also decided to not report specifically. So as you probably know because you applied to the initiative, but we didn't really give any guidelines on what to publish. So they were completely free to write whatever they wanted. We just hoped that they understood the challenges and solutions that we proposed, but then they were free to talk with whoever and report on whoever. And Fabiano decided that what really caught his attention is the fact that in every single restaurant in the San Martin region, they were serving tilapia, which is a kind of fish that is actually very, very invasive. And what he did, he knew that in his area, in the Brazilian Amazon, they want to actually bring tilapia in because it's also very productive and it sells very good. But he knew that was causing problems in the Peruvian Amazon. So he brought the governor of San Martin and the Brazilian government representatives that were in the conference, and he put them together to discuss the effects of that tilapia was having in the Amazon, which was very interesting because the Peruvian representatives were like, this fish was brought in illegally and it's having such a huge impact on our fisheries. It's actually like for tilapias to get big, they have to eat other species, and it's actually it was a really bad. It's so bad that we can't control this. Whereas the Brazilian government representatives were actually kind of keen to introduce tilapia. So please read this article to see how he manages those conflicting interests, and how he just used the opportunity of being there again to bring people that otherwise would have never been together. So for our last article is with Paula, the Swiss journalist, and she writes this amazing article because and it's amazing because it covers actually all the layers of a supply chain. So it's not only about deforestation from the perspective of the private sector, of deforestation from the perspective of the smallholders and the drivers behind deforestation. I need to clear the land, otherwise I can't cultivate. No, she does a complete and very complex read through the whole deforestation of related to palm oil in Peru, and covers every single layer. So she speaks with the farmers, she speaks with the retailer, she speaks with a supplier, she speaks with many people, and she does that with a lot of interactive elements, media elements. She does that by text, of course, the main content. She also has graphics, she also has videos, she also has photos. So it's like the perfect example of like, she's a freelancer, she did that all by herself, and it's a very good example of that journalism covering all types of possibilities, like from layers of the supply chains to like all the possibilities that technology offers right now. So I strongly encourage you to read the stories, to watch a video you haven't seen it, and of course to apply for next year. We really like to receive your application again.
Yeah, I was amazed by the range of stories that came out. And of course, there was a discussion before we started asking people to take part as to whether we should say to them, you've got to report on sustainable commodities, or cocoa, which was the main commodity that we saw while we were in the Amazon, or deforestation. We thought, well, no, let's just leave it and see what happens. And that's how at least two of these stories, as Christina said, came about because of a chance meeting between a journalist and somebody at the conference. And in the film of the journalist's journey, which we've sent you, but we'll send it to you again, Bimanto from the Palm Scribe is saying in there, if you had to put together a story and you're sitting in your office, as you know, it involves ringing one person, then ringing another person, then ringing a third person, the fourth person, and they're never in, and when they are in, they haven't got time to talk to you. So it's very difficult to actually get the raw materials of the interview, or the interviews, plural, all gathered together so that you can then put them into a story. If you're going to a conference, and of course what happened here was that we had the 2-day training program immediately followed by the 5-day conference, you're presented with a rich tapestry of possibilities, many of which you don't know until you start talking to the person concerned. And of course, that person may then say, well, you need to talk to them as well. And we'll draw a colleague in from another part of the complex and get them to talk to you about it as well. So it's actually a fantastic set of raw materials for stories going to conferences like that. And I think what we also managed to achieve, and this is a tribute to the journalists themselves, was rather than them being in a metaphorical glass box at the back reporting on what was going on in a different thing that was going on around them, they became delegates at the conference, just like everybody else. And again, when you watch the video, you see them taking part in the main conference sessions, you see them discussing in working groups and things like that. We didn't sort of put them in a separate fenced off area like you sometimes find journalists being placed in, and certainly photographers being placed in that type of fenced off area. We actually said, no, you can take part in the main proceedings of the conference, and that involved a lot of trust on our part that they weren't going to take that the wrong way, but it also involved some responsibility on their part as well, that they were going to make the most of it. So it's a very interesting process to go forward to. Now, as Christina said, the next opportunity, there will be another Good Growth Conference. We're planning it in 2021. It will be somewhere in Asia. Can't be any more specific than that at the moment, but at least you know sort of a vague region of the world that we're talking about. And we hope very much to run this same program again as a precursor to that conference. So assuming it runs from Monday to Friday, there'll be a 2-day course beforehand. If it starts at a different point of the week again, I think the important thing was that you had the thoughts in your mind as a journalist fresh from the training course, and the very next day you went to the first day of the conference. So we'll make sure that they do butt up against each other like that. And then the other thing that we're considering doing is carrying on with the online learning stream that we've got here with the Green Commodities community. So a number of you, when you talked about your best story, talked about aspects of how you work, the case we had from Rudy of working together across different national boundaries, with journalists in different countries in order to put together the whole supply chain, the whole system into a story. That's a very interesting thing that we could explore further in how commodity supply chains work, because they do go from country to country. And if you work as the UNDP does with governments as our significant point of contact, you can find that the government you're working with in Indonesia, for example, that's producing the palm oil, will actually not be in charge of the whole supply chain, because part of it will be exports that will go off to the USA and Europe and places where they use the palm oil for all sorts of different reasons. So you need to be able to encapsulate the whole system and to be able to operate along a supply chain basis, as well as the jurisdictional, geographical basis of working with the government. So maybe that's one topic that we talk about. But we're planning that out now, the new semester, as it were, for the green commodities community. And when we've got a few ideas about what we might put forward, we'll get in touch with you again as our community of journalists that applied for the live version of the green commodities community to take place in Lima. We'll get in touch with you again and make sure that we gather your views as well, because we want to be able to serve the sort of topics that you want to talk about, as well as the obvious central topics that are all part of reporting on green commodities. So look out for news of the Green Growth Conference in 2021, and look out for more news more immediately on the online learning that we'll be doing during the rest of this year and during 2020. Was that a question or somebody just going ping? I think that was just somebody going ping, wasn't it? So we're coming round to 3:30 now. It just concludes to me to say thank you. Thanks to my colleagues Christina, Rachel and Matthias, and to all of you for taking part. And I was wanting to put Here's to a Future of Excellent Journalism, then I found that front page. I don't know where Brampton is. I think it's somewhere in Canada, judging by the maple leaf at the top. But there's a real violent crime duo there that have been caught on video. Unfortunate conjunction of picture and headline. Thank you very much for your involvement, and whatever time of day it is where you are, I hope the rest of the day goes well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Nice
Bye.
to meet
Thank
you, Laura.
you.
Nice to meet you,
Bye.
Rosie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.